Hey, welcome back. I think I got the timing right on that one because there was it's always a delay in between when you go live and when you start speaking when I go back and watch the recording. So I just try to make sure that I jump right on top of it this time. So there you go. But yeah, this is another edition episode of the NX show where we talk about NX, we talk about the ecosystem, we talk about other cool projects. And we have guests on today, and I have another special guest as always. Um, and if you've seen the title of the show before, you'll kind of have an idea of what we're talking about today. But Jordan is joining me today. Jordan, thanks for coming on first of all, and why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Absolutely. A pleasure to be on this highly touted show where millions of people are watching.
Oh, thank you,
Um,
thank you.
like Brandon said, my name is Jordan Powell. I am a developer experience engineer at Cypress, and primarily I've had a lot of experience kind of in the Angular world, and I've helped contribute to NGRX and a big fan
Hmm.
of all that jazz. But I've always really loved Cypress, and I had the opportunity to come onto the team back in, let's see, would have been September, so just a few months ago, and just really excited about a lot of the things that's happening over here. So excited I'd make the switch and become I guess what we call ourselves, cyborgs or something. I don't know, but a Cypret. You guys are
Oh,
Narwhalians, right? Cypret,
yeah,
maybe.
Narwhalians. Okay, I didn't know that you had a particular name for
Well, I don't think we
people that work at
do, but
Cypress.
I just made it up. So
Oh, okay. Hey, that's even better when you make things up and they
organic.
just they could come more organically. Then I think it works out better that way. So cool. But yeah, thanks for coming on. I see we got a few people in the chat. We'll see if anybody chimes in there. But yeah, thanks for the people that are here. If you have any questions about the topics that we're covering today, feel free to drop those in the chat, and we'll try to answer some of them. And if not, we'll capture those for later and get you some answers there. Or you can, like I said, or you can also join the NX community Slack workspace, and so people will be able to help you out there too. But yes, uh, today we're talking about, as Jordan mentioned, he works at Cypress, and we want to talk about some of the best practices and some new features with Cypress. So I guess we always have to start out with the Jordan. What's the elevator pitch for Cypress? Because I know I'm sure there's some people who haven't maybe known or found out about Cypress yet, but
There's a
for
couple.
yeah, there's maybe a couple by now because it's pretty popular at this point. But and we promote it heavily, so there's that angle too. But what is Cypress for the person who doesn't know?
Sure. So I would say Cypress, like if you could put in one sentence, is a tool for reliably testing anything that runs in a browser. So
Mm.
um, basically, if you can load it in a browser, you can test it with Cypress. And um, the other part of that I would mention is it's actually like fun to use. Like I always hated using Protractor uh, and like a lot of other end-to-end frameworks.
Hmm.
But like I remember I was at this talk and I was like, what is this Cypress? This is like, I don't know, like 4 years ago or something. And I just saw it and I was like, this is like black magic. Like, how is this working? Like
Hmm.
it can't be this easy. And it was like, and then I started using it and I was like, this is actually like fun to do, like not like something that's painful. So that's one of the things that at Cypress, especially our developer experience team, we want like Cypress to be a tool you enjoy using,
Hmm.
because the benefits of automated testing, I think, are pretty. I don't know how you could really argue the benefits. Now, the costs that you know that are associated, it does take an investment to get there.
Hmm.
But it's like once you have, you know, good code coverage, like I don't think anyone complains about that. Like that's a good thing to have. Like it's a great safety net. So the fact that you can make it fun for developers, I think, is the thing that I don't know. I get excited about. So
Yeah, yeah, definitely. I can second that in that when I see developers like on Twitter and other places talking about Cypress, it's it's pretty popular. For the I can't remember the last time I saw somebody saying something negative about Cypress, but yeah, like I said, when I hear people talking about it, I hear those same things that you were saying, that it's an enjoyment to use, and they really liked it, really like switching to it from like Protractor or other testing tools out there um, that compared to what Cypress does and like the strengths that it does. So yeah, definitely some, like I said, I've heard good and positive things about it. And on the internet, of course, like I said, NX uses Cypress. So
I think it's similar to you guys too, because it's kind of like if you try to explain what NX is to someone, like, or
hmm
someone who's never used it, they're always like, "What?" Like they're always a little confused. But like once you use it, like the experience and
hmm
the all the things you get for free are just so great. So it's like once you use it and you see it, you'll like never want to not use it again. It's kind of like the same thing, I think.
Yeah, definitely. I can't disagree with that. 'Cause I agree with that statement. So we're gonna roll with that. Yeah. See, we got Lars in the chat. Hey, what's up, Lars? Thanks for stopping through. He already got a couple questions in there. We'll look out for some of those things. But yeah, like I said, we're talking about Cypress and best practices and things you should be mindful of when you're testing your applications with Cypress. Um, so I guess where do you want to start? What are some common tips that you would tell me? I don't know. I know some things about Cypress, but not much. So what are some of the things you would recommend me do or start with?
Sure. Let me share my screen. That's probably the best way to start.
Yeah, sure. Okay,
And
there we
okay,
go.
perfect. So these are just like high level, be about, I don't know. There's about 10 of these that kind of
Mm-hmm.
we highlighted. So uh, these are basically like anti-patterns versus like the best practice. So like one is organizing, logging, and controlling state. Obviously, any application controlling state, organizing it can be a challenge. So one of the things an anti-pattern that we see is like if you're sharing page objects, using your UI to log in and not taking shortcuts, that kind of stuff. And a best practice would be to like test specs in isolation, and mostly here programmatically logging into your application. I'll actually get into this a little bit more detail in a second,
Mm-hmm.
but that's a like high level like controlling state. Like those are things that you want to try to do the right way, obviously. Um, this is probably like the easiest thing, in my opinion, that you can start doing that that will give you a lot of benefits, and there's not a lot of there's almost no like downside. So I'll actually tell a story first. When
Mm-hmm.
I was working for I was working as a contractor for a client, and I was started that I cloned this repo and I built it and everything's great.
Mm-hmm.
I started banging out features, and like a month or two later, I get like as asked invited to some meeting. I was like, what in the world? And basically, I went to find out there was some other like team that basically was in charge of a protractor end to end like automated
Test suite.
testing application, but they
Mm-hmm.
were, and I was breaking all of their tests, but like the automated tests were not a part of like my framework at all, and they were using IDs to select everything. So like
Mm-hmm.
I was just ripping out stuff. I was like, we don't need this no more, and but it's a perfect example of like like as someone who's new to a project, like if you're using IDs and classes and things like that to test things in your application, like
Mm-hmm.
someone who has no uh, context of maybe that portion of your app or the app as whole wouldn't think anything of it. But with Cypress's with using data attributes, you can really avoid all that, and it's very simple. One thing here is here's like a little chart that shows like if you were to like compare them, like using like this is kind of like bad to worst,
Mm-hmm.
the different ways you can select. The cool thing too about Cypress is like Protractor and other end-to-end frameworks. Like the API for getting an element is like there's different commands based upon types and things like that. Where Cypress is just get. So like it can basically infer what you're trying to get from the DOM by using just this one command, which is cool. But yeah, so here, like, you don't have to avoid any of these other things. Like, literally just go in and use like data dash whatever. Like, you can name it sci or end to end or test or whatever you want to do. And this makes it very easy because, like, someone who doesn't have any context to your site, they would be able to know, like, oh, I probably shouldn't move this data dash end to end tag because, like, I'm assuming the end to end team is using that, or the end to end test suite is using that. So that's a pretty easy one, I think.
Yeah, I think. Yeah, I was
Go
gonna say
ahead.
I worked on some projects also where it was like we were working on like the application part of the project, similar to what you said, and then there was like another completely separate team that did like the QA part of it, but they basically took what we wrote or updated and tried to run, the test against that. So, things that are there when we're working on, cause when we're working on code bases like these, we figure if the code is there, then we have the flexibility, to
To
change it
do
and
whatever you
things.
want. Yeah.
Yeah. And then the unit test or, end-to-end test or whatever you have will kind of validate that you haven't
Yep.
broken anything from that perspective. But yeah, like I said, working on it was definitely a different experience working on a project where I wasn't necessarily I wasn't the person changing the feature, adding the features, and the one who was having to do the QA and the EDE part of it. So it definitely added a different mix of what you had to do there.
Yeah, and I think you're right. And those are all different dynamics of, how you build your teams and build software
Hmm.
and stuff like that. But I think the point to mention is just that, like, no matter which one you're using, if you use the data attributes, like, it's a safe way of doing of selecting elements, and it decouples, like, you know your styling logic and all that kind of
Hmm.
stuff. So, like, if you use like a button and you want to view it by what it contains or something like that, like, what if there's a requirement down the road that that button changes name, you change the copy of the button. So there's lots of reasons why. Just avoid it altogether, and it'll just save you time. So um, and here's just like an example of, you can also use custom commands. So, like,
Hmm.
there's a we have a our API basically supports adding custom commands code. So we actually recommend doing something like this, like get by selector, and it's almost like it's a uniform way of um, getting elements, and then it also safeguards you from trying to get elements like not this way, if that makes sense.
Hmm.
So it's kind of a easy safeguard you can put in place. Um, Here's another thing that when I first started, it bit me a lot. um, because, like, JavaScript, I'm like, this is cool, like it just JavaScript, which it is, but the
Hmm.
way Cypress works is a little bit different. Because it works on like a promise base, uh, like API. It's like promises, not exactly the same, but similar. But what would happen is I'd do something like this, where I would be like, let me assign, this anchor tag to a constant, and then, like, then I want to visit it and click on it, and then
Hmm.
it wouldn't work, because the way the API works, like, it chains. It's this promise chain, so it passes subjects down through this chain, and that's the way it works. And so if you, like, work with closures, if you have to um, do something like that, it's better to wrap it in like the dot then, like you would like with the promise or something like that.
Hmm.
um, and that's a much better way to, I guess, uh, do this thing. But yeah, I've learned this a few times, like, why is this not working?
Yeah, it's definitely. I think that have the promise based API gets the best of us
Oh,
at one point or another. So definitely following that. I think following that pattern of will help, like I said, help out in writing tests where you're having to like test, async behavior or even moving about a page or that kind of thing, waiting for things to settle, as they say. in order to be able to like target them correctly.
Yeah. Let's see. Oops. Yeah. So here's another one. Like, don't visit like third-party APIs, and this is like common. We mentioned with like when we were talking about like logging in, where it's like don't go to a third-party website and then click on the form and then type in your information, because like whatever it is, like Google, they could go in and number one, they could block you, like recognize that you're automated testing software and basically block you from doing that. But also, they could change, their UI very easily, and your whole test suite would be broken. So we recommend when logging in, stub out off providers, that kind of thing, using side at request to hit like third-party servers. And then do you remember what was it like last year? I think it was who was it? Was it HBO or somebody? They had sent out like the email thing.
Yeah.
This could help them right here, is they could have verified sending emails using a local server instead of sending out, I don't know how many it was, but it was pretty funny.
Yeah, I remember that. It was because everybody was like, yes, I can't exactly remember what the message was either, but it was like
it was like, this is an automated test or something like that.
Automated test, like the test pass, and that's all I saw on the feed that day was everybody talking about. Yes, I got it. My integration test passed. Thanks.
Yep. But this could have solved that problem, I guess. That's funny. So here's like another one. So the idea with automated tests is that you want them to be able to run like in any order, and so like you should be able to randomly run them and they work. And so like having tests that take the state from one test and pass it to the next, like that's something that will bite you like over and over, and you'll be like, it was just working and then it didn't work. So that's a thing that you want to try to avoid doing. Like you can use like the before each hooks to if there's something you want to run before each hook, like use the before each hooks to do that, instead of like passing state down or even duplicating things in tests. It's those hooks are there for a reason to help you with that.
Yeah, I've run it. I've seen this in code bases also, where you have some variable that's like set at the top of the describe, and then I'm going to set this variable to true here, and then I'm going to set it to false here, and then I'm going to kind of go through this progression, and then it's like, oh well, we want to, you run your tests in random mode, and then they start breaking, and you're like, well, what? Why are my tests breaking now? Well, because we haven't written them in a way that they are like isolated and it's kind of self-contained. So definitely a good practice to do that.
Yeah, and in Cypress you can chain dot only on the it, so you can do like it dot only, and it will only run like that command. So it's like if you're you have a big spec file or something, and you don't want to run through like 30 seconds of other tests, like you can chain like dot only to it, and it's like, but it's like if you don't have tests that work in isolation, then it will fail, and you sort of lose that. So that's again something definitely I would recommend. Here is let me actually skip to this one. So
and I've never left that dot only in the code and checked it in. I've
never
done that. I don't know who would do that, but not me.
Yeah, we need like a lint rule for that. Like, whoops, it's like a commit hook that's like, hey dummy, like remove this.
Remove the it only in your console logs. Just make sure you take those out.
It's funny. So in the same mode, like I've seen people that will use like after each or after hooks instead of before hooks, and the same sort of thing. It's like it will sort of work if you run it, but it's like if you run one in isolation and you need state that would have ran from the previous test on the after hook, it won't run on the only because you haven't hit it yet. So that's something we've seen sometimes too. So that's a kind of similar example, but one that can an easy fix, but can also like certainly bite you. Here's another one, like surprisingly we ran into is like we're taught like with unit testing, right? You want like you're testing one thing at a time. So it's like you want to test your test is going to have just one assertion essentially, where it's like so we've seen code bases where like you're we're basically like an end-to-end test would literally only test one thing, or at least so they thought. What's like literally almost everything in Cypress is an assertion. It's like if you visit a route and it can't visit it, it fails. Like
Mm-hmm.
if you try to get something and it's not there, it'll fail. Like even if you're not quote unquote running an assertion, you're still asserting things along the way, just sort of like as a part of like the using the API. And so yeah, like the reason why you would do that with unit tests is like different reasons, where like unit tests are very fast, and it's like with the browser,
Mm-hmm.
it's like you don't want to have to reload the browser just to
Right.
test something that's like really right next to it. You know what I mean? So it's like you want to um with Cypress end to end, you really want to like do a true end to end, like the user does this and then goes here, clicks here, is routed here. You know, you want to
Mm-hmm.
test all those things together and not like
So yeah, we
as
don't want to
single units.
micromanage the test. You want to actually
Exactly.
go through an actual flow to help you there.
Yeah, for sure. Here's another one. I've actually only had to. So this is like one of those things where,
Oh no, no.
yeah.
Right.
So this
Whenever I see
is,
the wait,
oh,
the wait for some amount of seconds, I always eye starts to twitch a little bit and
well, it's
brings
like, and
back old memories.
yeah, exactly, of other frameworks, you know, and it's like you had to do that all the time, you know, but Cypress basically waits automatically. You get that for free. I have
Mm-hmm.
had like I have had like features in the past where it's like there was actually a requirement where it's like I want to display this loader for 5 seconds or something like that, and it's
Mm-hmm.
like that would be a case where you would be like you literally want to wait for the requirement is to wait for a certain amount of time, but it's like other than that you should like really almost never use Cypress wait, because like you said it's really a code smell that something is not like you could be doing it differently using like aliases, that kind of thing, or
Mm-hmm.
something else is just not done right in your site. So
Yeah. So what is real quick? What is a route? What is I'm not familiar with all the terms. What is a route alias in Cypress?
like when you say so with Cypress, you can make a request. So say your page loads. I don't know, like when you load the products page, it loads. It calls
Mm-hmm.
some API endpoint and gets a list of products. Well, it's like you can, in order for your page to work, like you have to actually have products, coming back. So
Mm-hmm.
you can Cypress you can uses like these intercepts. Um, and so basically you can define the request and you could say, hey,
Oh, okay.
I'm gonna
I see.
wait for the product's endpoint, and you can either literally call your product's API or you can stub that data. But regardless, you can set it as you can chain .as to the end of that request, and then
Mm-hmm.
you basically define an alias. So then instead of waiting for 3 seconds for your test to continue, you would just basically wait until that alias is complete before you continue.
I see. Okay, that makes sense.
So that way, the reason why you do that is like if you have weights everywhere in your site or in your application, like you're wasting a lot of time like doing nothing.
Yeah,
Um, where it's like just wait as long as you need to and then continue. So that's kind of one of the things that really sets Cypress apart from other end-to-end frameworks, I think. So
hmm
here's another one, which is not something you would do with NX because NX just does all this magic for you. But we've seen people that will
you're welcome.
basically
No.
do the thing that NX does, and basically like because when you don't use NX, you have to serve your application because
Yeah.
you need the application actually run in the browser so Cypress can run, and then you need to also on a separate terminal, launch Cypress.
hmm
So you guys combine it into one task. Well, other people have been like, hey, I got this idea. I can do the same exact sort of concept, but uh, there's a lot of performance and other issues, and so would not recommend doing that. So just
I
use
see.
NX if you can. If not,
So if
uh,
you were trying to run, like you said, some other, let's say a new framework that doesn't, new web framework that doesn't support necessarily Cypress or doesn't have necessarily an integrated solution for that, your first thought may be to use one of these to kind of launch that web server as opposed to doing that as a separate thing.
yes, because some people will be like, I want to create a task that that runs my server and
Yeah.
launches Cypress, but it's like those things. Yeah, the way most of the time, if unless you really know what you're doing, like it's not going to work the way you think it is. So,
Mm-hmm.
um, yeah, just run in two terminals or use NX like that. That'd be my
That sounds like a good recommendation. Use two terminals or just use an X. That's all.
yeah.
So the tagline for you.
And then here's the other one is like if especially because you're running your tests locally, or if you're running your tests like in prod or like a CI environment or something like that,
Mm-hmm.
your base URLs are going to change. So you can there's a base URL basically property in the configuration, your Cypress config file, and you just set that to localhost 4200 or what your dev URL or whatever that is, and you could have different ones for your environment. So instead of hardwiring those base URLs into your requests in your applications, or like you're visiting a URL in your site, you could just use like the slugs instead of like the full URL, because Cypress is smart enough to realize, let me get the base URL and just visit the
Mm-hmm.
URL you passed me on at the end of it. So
Yeah, so Lars had to come in, maybe use NX13 NPM script targets. Yes, that's a good recommendation. Also, I've been trying to do some. I'll quick diversion. I've been doing some testing also with Remix. I think people are pretty seeing that come out recently and
yeah,
seeing how it kind of works with NX and just trying to see what kind of integration is there. And NPM script targets was the one of the ways that I use Cypress to try to run some just end-to-end tests against it, because, like I said, we don't have an official plugin yet, but I was just trying to see how the two things could work together to kind of like fill out the stack. So definitely the npm script targets worked for that.
nice. That's great recommendation. Lars to the rescue.
Yep.
So that's like the main, like those are the main pretty easy like anti patterns that we find, that if you
Mm-hmm.
just fix those like in your application, like you'll find working with Cypress is much more fun uh and more reliable, because like in the end, like if your tests, no matter like you enjoy your writing tests or hate writing tests, like if you can't trust your tests, then they're
Yeah.
pointless, like you know what I mean. So
Mm-hmm.
it's like in the end you want tests that aren't flaky, they're reliable, and ultimately if you can enjoy writing them, that's great too. So
Yeah, definitely. I've definitely ran into situations where like having brittle tests is just like the worst thing you can. Brittle end-to-end tests are the worst thing you can like have to battle with when you're trying to ship stuff. So definitely having that be a lot more stable and reliable is um, people will write tests if they know that they're not going to have a bad experience like writing them. So they'll at least be more inclined to write them. Because the one thing that you don't want is for people to say, well, we can't trust these EDE tests anyway, so let's just turn those off, and
yeah,
we'll just trust that the application still
and,
works.
and it's and the bad thing is like it's not like a unit test where you can just normally if I'm coding something, I'll just just watch, run my tests, NX test, and then use the watch flag, and it'll just you know if I break something, it'll just yell at me, like I don't even notice it, just lets me know. But
Mm-hmm.
it's like with end-to-end tests, like it does, like they're just not as fast. Like
Yeah.
Cypress is pretty fast as a whole, but it's like you don't get instant feedback. So it's like normally, so it's like if it does fail, you want it to fail like on purpose and not
Mm-hmm.
as an accident. Like that's super frustrating. Or it's like you run it locally and it's fine, and then you ship it to the CI and then it fails.
You
And
don't want the test to be like rolling the dice. Like every time
yeah,
I 8 out of 10
maybe
times,
this time.
8 out of 10 times, this promise is going to fail to resolve for some reason, and I don't have no idea why. Those are those are the things that you don't want.
Yeah, that's funny.
Yeah.
So yeah,
So
that concludes best practices.
cool. So yeah, for the people watching, like I said, we're talking about best practices and new features and things like that in Cypress. We had a few questions in there already, but if you're just joining and you have some questions that we may be able to answer, feel free to drop those in the chat. But yeah, we like I said, these we talked about best practices in Cypress. I'll switch to back here. We talked about best practices in Cypress, and this is we encourage, like you said, using Cypress out of the box with your projects. Of course, we promote that. But there are, like I said, we talked about Protractor also, and having the Protractor, I guess, in the Angular ecosystem is being moved away from to be more centered towards Cypress. So, do you have any tips as far as migrating from Protractor? Or I know that that's part of you want people are using Protractor today. We want people to use Cypress, uh, and I think some of those tips help that you talked about in best practices. There, is there any other things you like to share there?
Yeah. So obviously, we feel for you, the protractor people, because if you've ever had software that you work with get deprecated, it's not a fun place to be in. So
Yeah.
obviously, uh, sorry about that. But I will say we actually have one of the things that I've been working on is and things that we have uh, that were done prior to me coming is we have actually like a migrating from Protractor to Cypress guide.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the things that is important to note is Cypress and Protractor sort of as a whole or not. It's not like comparing apples to apples. It's a little like apples to oranges. Like the way they fundamentally work
Yeah.
are going to be different. But we do a lot of. I think we have a pretty good documentation here around like this is how you would do something in Cypress or in Protractor, and then like after migrating, this is how it would look like in Cypress. So here's like an example, and I mentioned this like this is like selecting things like here you're using like browser.get. Well, here's site.visit. Like that's pretty straightforward. Like that's pretty like you could read that and pretty much understand that. But like here in Cypress, like
Mm-hmm.
or here in Protractor, like you select elements differently. So element and then like by CSS or by CSS containing text or there's different ways to select different types of
Yeah.
things
Mm-hmm.
where it's like with Cypress, the beautiful thing is just one API method. It's just site.get. So it makes it really easy. And then it just uses jQuery selectors essentially. And I think it's funny because like jQuery is like everywhere on the internet and everyone hated using it. But it's like Cypress finally found like the perfect purpose for for jQuery after all these years. It's like we can just use it to select these things.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
There always had to be balance there, and I think that Cypress has found a good balance of that syntax that jQuery kind of jQuery used, or we were also accustomed to using with jQuery.
yeah, for sure. Um, And then let's see, like we have some benefits. You're going to get faster feedback loops.
Mm-hmm.
You're getting time traveling tests. I don't want to just read through this, but like this doc here is going to be your best friend when actually migrating. Here's another example, like by tag name, by ID name, link
Mm-hmm.
text. But again, it's like here, this it's all the same API. Or the only difference is like when you're trying to find an element that contains something, you can do like that contains. But everything else, like I said, is you're using one API method, which I find nice, like I said, because like pretty much everyone, like if you've written CSS or anything before, like this is pretty like it's a level of understanding you don't have to like teach yourself. Like it just kind of
Mm-hmm.
makes sense.
Yeah, you're
Um,
kind of building on top of the things that you've already that you may be already familiar with if you've had to write CSS selectors and that kind of thing. So
Yeah. So here's like again, like on their side, like there's just so many things like how you do assertions, like um, this is it walks through lengths and class and
mm-hmm.
values, and then like then we go to like negative assertions, how you do that, and then like network things are going to be a big difference. Like I mentioned earlier, like normally you'd visit a user's page, but then you would have like an API endpoint that would call like a user's endpoint. It would get like a list of users or something like that. Well, here's
Mm-hmm.
how you use our side of intercept API method, and and this is how you define like that request. And you can do stubbing, so you can basically say, this, I'm going to make a GET request, I'm going to call this endpoint, or I'm going to stub that result. And then you can manually say, I want to return a 500 because I want to, handle like here, like this instance, I want to know the weather forecast is unavailable. I want to make sure that one is unavailable, that the user
Mm-hmm.
knows it's unavailable, and that's unavailable when there's a 500. So you can pretty easily like do that kind of thing. And here's this the alias syntax I was talking about. So here you can set as, and then you can set this alias as projects, and then instead of like
Okay,
waiting
I
for
see.
amount of time, you just say waiting for this alias,
Mm-hmm.
which is much easier, much more reliable than just let's just roll the dice with 3
You're gonna
seconds.
wait for some amount of time, from some varying amount of time for these things to finish.
Yeah. So then these are pretty straightforward. I don't want to belabor the point. It's kind of
Yeah.
boring, but you get the point here. Like we have as you can see, it's a pretty detailed like comparison. We also have kind of like we updated the protractor
Mm-hmm.
to
In the
Cypress migration and the NX site. So here's a kind of we kind of took all the things we have on the Cypress docs and kind of simplified them into like these are the things you like will most likely do, kind of like a simplified version. And then it's specific also to like using NX. So if for some reason you're using NX and using Protractor and not using Cypress, like this is a great guide for that.
Yeah, I've come across some projects that were heavily using Protractor, and it was a significant effort to try to a significant effort to move them over to Cypress. But at least the good part about it was that we were able to you can generate different Cypress EDE projects for or Cypress projects for that particular application or have it for a particular feature. So, and then you can kind of separate and migrate away from Protractor kind of one by one instead of having to migrate your whole suite at one time.
Yeah, and to that point, something I would love to share, but it's so I'll share, but and just know it's not like it's not officially released, but I'll give a little
Mm-hmm.
sneak peek. So this is something that I've been working on, and several people on our DX team. But basically, this is actually like a code mods um, library that we've been working on that basically will help migrate actual protractor code into like the actual like Cypress code. So here's like an example of like you're gonna get the Cypress docs, and then we want to make
Mm-hmm.
sure that the title's this, and we want to make sure that there's actually this redirect rule that happens. We want to make sure that the current one actually equals this. So if you actually click this button, it will actually generate the
Okay.
Cypress um, corresponding language. So again, this is not like a just shove everything like your whole
Mm-hmm.
entire protractor.
Let
Like,
me go and copy paste my whole Protractor, every Protractor suite in here and see what it gives me.
yeah, exactly. So I can pretty much guarantee you that probably wouldn't be 100% accurate, but it does work pretty good. And the thing is it's a great learning tool because it's like if you have something, maybe you don't even know anything about Protractor, but you're given a Protractor like intent task,
Mm-hmm.
tasked to convert it. It's like, well, I don't know what this thing does, but it's like I can go in and be like, okay, what is browser dot do, and then it will be able to do that. So that's
Yeah, I think
kind
if
of cool.
anything, it gives you a good, like you said, a good baseline or reference of what you're translating, what you're used to what where you're trying to get to. So, if anything, it can just speed up that part of it as opposed to having to like sift through the docs and large guides and things like that.
Yeah, and we also do like we do also do like, for instance, like weighting. Like here's an example, and we give you the actual like translation, but we pretty much tell you like this is an anti-pattern. Like you probably shouldn't do this unless
Mm-hmm.
like you're kind of crazy, or like there's some edge case. And then we also like I forget what this other code. So we also generate like links, hyperlinks to the actual methods that were generated. Um, so like you're using the visit, title, should, and location methods in the API. So these actually link to those spots in the docs too. So it's a really good way
Mm-hmm.
to um, just drill into those sections of the docs too. So
Oh, cool. Yeah, that looks pretty nice, and I'm pretty sure a lot of people will appreciate the work that the team is doing on that to make their migrations easier if they're like in the situation where they're having to move off Protractor, which is going to be officially end of life. I think next is it next year or something.
it's it's I think November, and so here's also another. We have the Cypress schematic, which will take your Protractor um, code, and it will if you're using like the Angular CLI, you just run this, and um, it will it will basically convert your Protractor into Cypress essentially.
Hmm,
So
I
it's
see.
again, it gives you what NX does for free, but
There you go. Let's see, Josh, you got a big brand idea.
oh
Facade pattern
geez.
for the libraries. Here we go. It's Josh starting trouble. But yeah, that's pretty cool. That like they said, y'all working on that tool and then have the schematic there that handles some of that also. And then of course, like I said, NX you get the generate Cypress projects out of the box there, so that definitely helps a lot too.
For sure.
Yeah, so I think that we talked about best practices and kind of migrating from Protractor. Um, but I think you talked about that Angular schematic also. Is there anything else new that's coming with Cypress soon that you wanted to talk about?
Sure. So I would say two things. One is I will say I can't. We don't have an official launch date yet, but Cypress,
Hmm. No
um,
promises. No
yeah, no
promises,
promises.
watchers. Those people in the
But
chat, you're gonna have to wait.
Q1, I can promise you in Q1, Cypress is gonna release the new version, and it's a very very big version,
Hmm.
and it will have component testing, not for Angular yet, but that is on the roadmap. But it will have component testing for React and Vue,
What do
and
you
it's
mean it's not going to have support for Angular?
I
No, I'm just.
I know,
We got
but
two Angular, primarily Angular people on the show here, and we got Cypress support coming with Angular on the way soon. So
yeah.
there you go.
But it will be a pretty big. It's really cool. I've seen it, and it's awesome. And I can't wait for it to come out. So that's one thing. So look
Hmm.
out for that. The beginning of the year, we'll be launching that, and then the other cool thing that's out now that I don't think a lot of people know about, but it's actually a really cool feature, is Cypress Session. And
Okay.
basically, what it does is it you wrap around. Like maybe you have a command to log in as user A or user B, and you want to make sure like one user has authorization to visit one part of the site, and one doesn't have that same authorization. Well, it's like
Hmm.
normally you'd have to literally like log in and then log out, and then like that kind of thing, which takes time. Where you can actually wrap um, the size session is a wrap around it, so you can very easily switch context between sessions without
Okay.
having to log out and log back in, which is really cool.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. And just to circle back the you mentioned the component testing is coming. Can you talk about like kind of at a high level of what the component testing in Cypress is?
Yeah, so I would say so component testing is, I mean, it is what it sounds like. It's for testing components. It's going to be kind of similar if you've used like something like Karma or Storybook. It's kind of similar in
Mm-hmm.
the fact of like you can test a component in isolation with different props and that sort of thing. But one of
Okay.
the cool things is that it's the same API that you're used to using with Cypress. Like, so you're
Mm.
not using a different set of you're not learning anything else. It's just, you want to get the thing, you want to know, you want to assert that something, that it contains something or has a certain class. Like, all those things are the same API surface, which again I can appreciate as as engineers, the less new things we have to learn, like the
Mm-hmm.
better. Like, so being able to use something new without a huge learning curve, I think is going to be really cool. So there'll be ways, and if you're using tools like Storybook and things like that, like there's ways to basically migrate um, you know those tests into component testing. So it's going to be a great way to test the other side of end-to-end, where it's like, you want to test the entire user experience from one end of the
Mm-hmm.
application to the other, to like, I want to test this thing in isolation. Like, that's what component testing sort of fulfills, the other end of the spectrum.
Okay.
So it
Definitely
wouldn't
cool with
like
that.
it wouldn't replace like unit tests, but it would be like more similar to a unit test, if that makes sense. So it
Mm-hmm.
is it is a component testing, like
Yeah.
if you've used something like that before.
Yeah. Sounds like Cypress is going to be eating up more of your more of your test suite is what it sounds like to me.
Yes.
Josh says he's going to see if he's going to change his opinions on testing. I'm going to go out on a limb and say no,
Say
it's not,
no.
Josh. No, it's not. You're going to change your opinion on testing. And he also had a question about component harness testing, which I think this is a uh, different, or would you say it's different than component harness testing, like in Angular Material?
Uh, it's kind of similar, but it's much easier, and it just works better. Like, the thing with Angular, it's like if you use the component harness, like it's like if your the DOM renders some, like, you add a button or something else, and then it will just like stop working, because
Mm-hmm.
you're actually like harnessing like the whole module or everything else in it, where it's like this, it's still running in the browser, so you're just selecting this one like thing. So it it's the similar idea, but the way it works is definitely different in a way
Mm-hmm.
that it's more more reliable, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I got you there. Yeah, so I mean, I'll drop this link into the chat there for the session. Because yeah, that was something I definitely hadn't seen before, the Cypress Session thing there, and that functionality looks pretty cool. Like I said, having not having to, it's all about saving time. I think at this point, where you're not having to log out and re-log back in, as far as doing that for testing different users in different scenarios, which is definitely pretty cool.
Yeah, it's one of those features that was like pretty. It was actually pretty big, but like most people haven't heard about it yet, because like just like the timing of when it was released, and everyone's looking forward to component testing. So it's kind of like they didn't really care, but it's like it's actually a really cool. It's a really cool, method, if
Mm.
especially if you're testing a lot of user authorization, that kind of stuff, which you should be. So it should be something that most people find very helpful. So
Hmm. Yeah, definitely so. And I think we're on that. I think we're good there. I think I think we at least answered the questions there that were asked in the chat, and I didn't see any new ones. So I guess that's good. Good as ever place to stop there for this session of NX show. But yeah, Jordan, thank you for coming on to the show, and we'll definitely try to have you back on at another time to talk about the latest version of Cypress and the new stuff that comes out with that, and we can maybe see some demos and some new best practices that come out of the newer versions and stuff like that. So cool.
Be sweet.
But yeah, as I mentioned before, definitely follow NX DevTools on Twitter. I'm usually pretty good about bringing up these banners. Let's see. There you go. NX DevTools on Twitter. So definitely follow us there. If you've watched this, gotten this far in the show, go ahead and give the YouTube video a like there if you're watching there, and subscribe to the channel, because that definitely helps out the channel. It gets it in front of more people. You can follow Jordan on Twitter also. Jordan, his name is in his hand, right beside his name there, Jordan Powell 88. Jordan, did you have anything else you wanted to add before we wrap up?
I don't think so. If you do run into any Cypress related questions, you can. Twitter's a great place to reach out. Either tweet at me or DM me, and I'd be happy to answer the question. If I don't know it, I can try to find someone who can answer your question. So.
Yes, that's what we do. We if we can't answer your question, we try to connect you with the people that can. So cool. Definitely like I said, thank you for coming on, and thanks to everyone that's been hanging out, and we will see everyone next time. See ya.